Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
My family was never rich, but we've got a cozy home with a beautiful yard that my folks have poured their hearts into. Ever since I was a kid, I've watched them transform our plain lawn into a colorful oasis of flowers and plants. I helped them tend to the garden, learning about different plants and how to care for them. Among all the flowers in our yard, the bougainvilleas hold a special place in my parents' hearts. They bought them recently to celebrate their 30th wedding anniversary, splurging a bit on these beautiful red flowering plants. They've been nurturing them carefully, hoping to see them bloom fully soon. This morning, everything changed. I was in the kitchen when I heard voices from the front yard. Curious, I peeked out the window to see my mom talking to our elderly neighbor. I could tell something was off. The elderly neighbor seemed to be asking for our bougainvilleas. The neighbor wanted to plant them in his yard. My mom suggested asking a gardener about cutting and replanting. The neighbor, however, insisted that my mom should just dig up our plants and put them in his yard. He even mentioned having 2 empty holes ready for them. The neighbor went on saying he liked the red ones and asking when my mom could dig them up. My mom explained that we had just bought them and they were still growing. The neighbor suggested letting them grow in his yard instead. Finally, my mom had to refuse and suggest he buy his own plants from a shop. The elderly neighbor didn't stop there. He walked over to where my dad was trimming some bushes and started pestering him too. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the elderly neighbor walked off cursing loudly. I rushed outside to check on my parents. I asked if they were okay and what had happened. My dad explained that the old man wanted us to dig up our anniversary bougainvilleas and plant them in his yard for free. My mom added that she couldn't believe he thought we'd just give them away, emphasizing how much those plants meant to us. A few hours later, we heard a commotion from next door. Our other neighbor, a kind woman who owns a friendly golden retriever, was screaming. We all ran out to see what was happening. The woman was cradling her dog, which was whimpering in pain. There was blood on its leg. Through her tears, she told us what happened. She explained that the elderly man from down the street had hit her dog with his cane, just because the dog was playing in its own yard. We were shocked. This was a whole new level of crazy. My dad immediately offered to drive them to the veterinary clinic, while my mom called the police to report the incident. As we waited for my dad to return, we saw the elderly neighbor watching us from his porch. How could someone be so cruel? When my dad came back, he had mixed news. He told us that Buddy would be okay, as it was just a minor injury, but warned that the vet bills would be quite expensive. That was the last straw for us. We decided it was time to take action. My mom organized a neighborhood meeting and everyone agreed to file a joint complaint against the elderly neighbor for his erratic and dangerous behavior. The police took our complaint seriously, especially given the attack on the dog. They visited the elderly neighbor and gave him a stern warning. But we didn't stop there. We also contacted his adult children who lived in another state to inform them about their father's behavior. A week later, we saw a moving truck in front of the elderly neighbor's house. His daughter had come to take him to live with her, realizing he couldn't be left alone anymore. As they were leaving, the daughter approached us. She apologized profusely for all the trouble her father had caused. She explained that he had been struggling with his mental health, but they hadn't realized how bad it had gotten. She thanked us for bringing this to their attention. As for Buddy, he made a full recovery and became a neighborhood celebrity, with everyone showering him with extra love and treats. My life had always been pretty ordinary until my son came along. He was diagnosed with autism when he was 3, and since then every day has been an adventure. Don't get me wrong, I love him more than anything in this world, but it hasn't been easy. Today started like any other Saturday. I was in the backyard watching my little guy play on his favorite swing set. He's always been a bit clumsy, but today he took a nasty fall. One minute he was laughing, the next he was on the ground, clutching his arm and screaming. I knew right away we needed to get to the emergency room. The drive to the hospital was a blur. My son was in the back seat, alternating between crying and going eerily quiet. I kept looking back at him, trying to keep him calm while navigating through traffic. When we finally arrived at the ER, I rushed him inside, praying it wasn't anything serious. We were taken to a room pretty quickly, probably because of how upset my son was. A doctor came in, examined him, and ordered some x-rays. It turned out he had a fractured wrist. Nothing too serious, but it would need a cast. The doctor left to prepare everything, and that's when she walked in. The nurse looked like she was in her late 40s, with a pinched face and cold eyes. She started checking my son's vitals, but I could feel her staring at me. Finally, she spoke. The nurse commented on how difficult it must be to raise a child like mine. When I asked her to clarify, she explained that she meant a child with special needs, and how exhausting it must be. I was taken aback. Sure, it could be challenging at times, but the way she said it made me uncomfortable. I told her that while it could be difficult sometimes, he was my son and I loved him. The nurse then asked if I had ever considered other options. When I asked what she meant, she suggested there were places that specialized in caring for children like him, implying that I could have a chance to live my life freely. Was she seriously suggesting I abandon my child? I told her that her comment was completely inappropriate and asked her to stop. The nurse persisted, saying she was just trying to help and that I was still young. She suggested I could start over and have a normal family. I told her to stop and that the conversation was over. I was fuming. How dare she? I immediately asked to speak to the hospital manager. When he arrived, I explained what had happened. The nurse denied everything, of course, but I stood my ground. The manager assured me he'd look into it and left to review the security footage. That's when things really went off the rails. The nurse turned to me angry. She called me an entitled person and accused me of trying to ruin her career. Before I could react, she lunged at me. I felt her nails scratch my face as I tried to push her away. My son started screaming, terrified by the sudden violence. I yelled for help, trying to protect both myself and my child. Suddenly, the room was filled with people. Security guards rushed in, tackling the nurse to the ground. Doctors and other nurses came running, probably drawn by all the commotion. It was chaos. As the security guards detained the nurse, I hugged my son tightly, trying to calm him down. The hospital manager returned, his face pale, as he took in the scene. He apologized profusely, telling me they had reviewed the footage and that the police were on their way. I nodded, still in shock. What followed was police statements, comforting my son and finally getting his arm properly casted. The nurse was arrested on the spot, charged with assault and battery. I pressed charges against both the nurse and the hospital. The nurse lost her license and faced criminal charges. Life isn't always easy, but I wouldn't change it for the world. My son is perfect just the way he is, and I'll always be there to protect him, no matter what. When my sister got pregnant at 16, it shook our whole family. Our parents were angry and disappointed, but I saw how scared and alone my sister felt. I promised myself I'd always be there for her and her baby. As the years went by, I kept that promise. I was there for my niece's first steps, her first day of school, and all the moments in between. When my sister struggled to make ends meet, I'd chip in for groceries or help with the rent. It wasn't always easy, but seeing my niece grow up happy and healthy made it all worth it. I never had kids of my own, so my niece became like a daughter to me. I paid for her summer camps, helped with her college applications, and even bought her first car. It wasn't about the money for me, it was about giving her opportunities I knew my sister couldn't always provide. When my niece got engaged, I was over the moon. At the family dinner where they announced it, I offered to help with the wedding expenses. I thought it was clear I meant I'd contribute, not foot, the entire bill. But apparently, that's not how they took it. A few weeks later, my sister called me up, all excited. She told me about a beautiful resort in Hawaii they'd found for the venue. She mentioned they were thinking about 200 guests and gushed about the dress they'd picked out. When I expressed surprise at how expensive it all sounded, she brushed off my concerns, saying I'd agreed to take care of it. I felt my stomach drop. I never agreed to pay for a destination wedding for 200 people. I tried to explain this to my sister, but she just dismissed my worries. reminding me that I'd always been there for them and that this was her daughter's big day. I decided I needed to set things straight. I invited them both over for dinner to discuss the wedding plans. That's when I dropped the bomb. I told them I was happy to contribute $15,000 to the wedding as that was what I could afford. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my niece burst into tears. She accused me of breaking my promise to pay for the wedding. My sister chimed in, asking how I could do this to them after everything we've been through. I tried to explain that I never promised to pay for everything, insisting that $15,000 was a lot of money. My sister argued that it wasn't enough, saying they'd already started booking things and didn't know what to do now. I stood my ground, but they stormed out, both furious with me. For weeks I didn't hear from either of them. Then, 3 months before the wedding, my phone rang. It was my sister sobbing. She told me they were going to lose all their deposits for the venue, caterers, and everything else. She accused me of ruining her daughter's wedding. I asked how this could be my fault, when I never agreed to pay for all of it. My sister insisted that I had offered to help, and that they never would have planned something so big if they didn't think I was covering it. She said they now looked like fools in front of my future son-in-law's family. I argued that it wasn't fair, reminding her that I'd supported them both for years and wasn't responsible for their assumptions. My sister accused me of being manipulative, saying I had offered to help and then pulled the rug out from under them at the last second. After everything I'd done for them over the years, they were treating me like I was the bad guy for not bankrolling their extravagant wedding fantasies. I apologized for their situation but told her it wasn't my responsibility to fix it. I reiterated that my offer of $15,000 still stood, but that was all I could do. My sister angrily replied that they didn't want my money anymore, saying I'd done enough damage. Then she hung up on me. For days I wrestled with guilt and anger. Had I really done something wrong? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed to stand my ground. I decided to reach out to my niece one last time. I sent her a long email detailing everything I'd done for her over the years, not to make her feel bad, but to remind her of our relationship. I explained again that I never meant to promise to pay for the entire wedding, and that I was hurt by how they treated me. To my surprise, she called me a few days later. She apologized, admitting that they had gotten carried away. She told me that she and her mom had talked and realized they'd been unfair to me. My niece then explained that they were scaling back the wedding, canceling the Hawaii plans, and reducing the guest list. She asked if my offer of help still stood. I assured her that of course my offer still stood, and I told her I'd be honored to walk her down the aisle if she'd have me. The wedding was beautiful, not because of how much it cost, but because we were all there together. It wasn't the fairy tale extravaganza they'd initially planned, but it was filled with love and genuine happiness. And for me, that was worth more than any amount of money. Finding clever loopholes and bending rules without breaking them was a skill I picked up early in life, especially after growing up with strict parents who had a rule for everything. By the time I hit college in the mid-90s, I'd become an expert at creative compliance. My college years were full of exciting new experiences and the same old bureaucratic nonsense. One of the most annoying things was the parking situation. The campus was huge, and everyone needed a car to get around. But to park on campus, you needed a permit. And not just any permit. It had to be attached to your windshield in a very specific way. When I first heard about the parking permit rules, I knew I had to find a way to outsmart them. The official requirement stated that the permit had to be attached to the windshield with its own backing. They made a big deal about how taping the permit wasn't allowed. It seemed like a stupid rule to me, but I saw an opportunity. I went to get my permit, and as soon as I had it in my hands, my mind started working. I grabbed some clear plastic wrap from my dorm room and carefully wrapped it around the middle of the permit. I made sure to leave just a tiny bit of the permit's sticky backing exposed at the top and bottom. Then, with a smug smile, I attached it to my windshield. For a while, everything was fine. I parked on campus without any issues, feeling pretty clever about my little trick. But one day, I came back to my car to find a parking ticket slapped on the windshield. The reason? Apparently, I had taped my permit to the windshield. I was furious. I knew I hadn't broken any rules, and I wasn't about to pay for a ticket I didn't deserve. So, I decided to appeal it. The day of my appeal, I marched down to the parking office, ready for a fight. When I got to the window, the clerk looked at me with that bored expression that all bureaucrats seem to have perfected. I explained my situation, trying to keep my cool. I told her I was there to appeal the parking ticket, insisting that I hadn't taped my permit to the windshield. The clerk looked at the ticket and informed me that it said my permit was improperly attached. I argued back, stating that I had followed the rules exactly. With a sigh, the clerk asked me to explain how I had attached it. I went into detail about my plastic wrap method, watching as the clerk's expression changed from boredom to confusion to annoyance. She then told me that my method wasn't what they meant by attaching it with its own backing. That's when I felt my temper flare. I leaned in close to the window and told her that I didn't care about what they meant, but what was written. I emphasized that the permit was attached to the windshield with its own backing, which was exactly what their rules said and what I had done. The clerk looked taken aback. She clearly wasn't used to students standing up for themselves like this. She tried to argue about the intent of the rule, but I interrupted her. I insisted that the intent didn't matter, only what was written. I challenged her, asking if she was going to enforce the rules as they were written or make up new ones on the spot. There was a long pause. The clerk looked around, probably hoping for backup from a supervisor, but none came. Finally, with a heavy sigh, she agreed to drop the ticket this time, but warned me not to think I could keep doing this. I responded confidently, stating that as long as I was following the rules as they were written, they couldn't stop me. I walked out of that office feeling like I'd won a major victory, not just for myself, but for every student who'd ever been screwed over by arbitrary rules and power-tripping administrators. For the rest of my time at college, I kept using my plastic wrap method, and I never got another ticket. Word must have spread about the student who outsmarted the parking office, because I sometimes caught parking attendants looking at my permit with annoyance. I realized that sometimes the most effective way to change a broken system is to work within it, just not in the way they expect you to. And if that means wrapping a parking permit in plastic wrap, well, so be it. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.